Hello and welcome to a 1v1 game between demu and coRe. Here we have coRe playing as the Holy Roman Empire with the color orange on Dry Arabia, and to the north it is going to be demu playing as the blue Byzantines. Byzantines is definitely a civilization that players started experimenting a lot ever since they got some buffs in a recent patch, as well as ever since the end of the EGC finals. With the tournament done, players are now exploring options with these civilizations that were considered a little weaker before the tournament, especially Byzantines and the Order of the Dragon, and they are essentially now developing the meta for these civilizations. Now you could ask why they haven't really done this before the tournament, but one thing to consider is that before the tournament, players had a limited time between the release of the DLC and the start of the tournament to prepare. So many of them just opted to master a couple of the new civilizations, Ayyubids and Jeanne d'Arc specifically, that were known to be very effective and extremely powerful. And they kind of neglected many of these civilizations, Byzantine's Order of the Dragon as well. Now, of course, part of the reason why is because some of these civilizations felt somewhat underwhelming in the games we've seen from these civs. But we have to keep in mind, the meta isn't fully developed for these civs yet. For a long time, some of the civilizations in the release version of the game were considered extremely weak, and it took almost a year for players to figure out how to play them effectively. Once they did, people realized they're actually good civilizations, but whenever you bring in a new civilization, it always takes time to figure the civilization out exactly, optimize builds, and once you do, they actually become a lot more effective than they initially seemed when the new civilization was released. So, demu is opening up with sheep only, so this is something that could end up being a winery build here. Something that you commonly do when you don't touch your berries in Dark Age. If you go for your berries in Dark Age, it almost always ends up being a hippodrome build. Now, the fact that you are not touching your berries, it doesn't mean that it is not going to be a hippodrome build, but demu, for the time being, went with the sheep, is going to age up with the hippodrome. He is going to have enough stone for a second cistern very soon, but he's actually building a mining camp towards stone. Now, when you build a mining camp close to stone, that can mean two things with the Byzantines. A, you want to drop a lot of cisterns. B, you want to play multiple town centers. Now, I'm somewhat surprised about this hippodrome build in this case, because one build that has been fairly popular with Byzantine players is essentially 2TC, turtley, eco, and then a semi-fast castle approach. The other build that has been very popular is essentially hippodrome. You make a couple of horsemen, and then you rush castle age, and that's where you go from there. But I haven't actually seen that many games where 2TC builds and the hippodrome were combined, so I'm actually curious how this is going to go. 3 villagers on stone, could still just be 4 cisterns, but we'll have to see very soon. Now, we have to keep in mind that we're up against the HRE here, and the HRE will most likely want to fast castle this, especially when coRe was so successful collecting sheep. Look at all this. coRe actually has a massive advantage in the sheep count compared to demu. demu had a very underwhelming haul of sheep. Now, coRe went for 2 scouts, so you can understand him having an advantage of some extent in the sheep department. But you gotta say, coRe did a great job collecting essentially all the sheep from the map here with the 2 scouts he had. He also scouts 5 villagers on stone. This is way too much for just cisterns. He's still waiting. He's actually waiting to see how much stone demu takes from the outcropping, because that's a clear indicator as to what he is going to do with the stone. But right now I feel like coRe is very aware of the fact that demu wants to play 2 TCs. And that's actually very good for the HRE. 2 TCs means that he isn't going to get aggressed early on, so coRe could easily play fast castle here. But it's not like... Wait a second, he dropped the barracks. Now, coRe could do a lot of things with this Aachen Chapel, by the way. He's got a beautiful Aachen Chapel spot. This is as good as it gets. Gold, stone, wood, and food all included. If he wanted to play 2 TCs, he would even have the stone miners buffed. But he's actually dropping a barracks here. Makes me wonder what exactly the plan could be. He might be trying to just play defensive against the hippodrome, expecting some horsemen. He might try to hit the gold mine with a couple of spears. But I think he is going to play fast castle here. And he's going to play for Ragnit's Cathedral relics. One of the best ways to deal with a 2TC build from any civilization, essentially, is securing map control, rushing Castle Age, and grabbing all the relics. The relics give you an immediate boost of an economy, so that's something that can help offset the eco differential coming from the discrepancy in town centers. Second Cistern just now in for Demu. He's still on stone, so he's going to continue building out the cisterns. Now, when you play 2TC Byzantines, the more common landmark that you age up with is the Golden Horn Tower. Because you want to get those mercenaries out, especially considering that Demu is yet to start gathering olive oil. So I feel like when you play 2TC Byzantines, it's usually Golden Horn Tower. But I'm actually a big fan of the Cistern of the First Hill and playing into Cataphracts. Especially against the HRE, that could work very nicely. Because you do have that healing ability for the Cataphracts. It's great to secure map control and limit the opponent's access to the relics. Still, Demu's gonna get beaten very badly to Castle Age here. And I like this a lot for coRe. He actually has a barracks, but didn't make a single spearman. Kind of wasted of an investment. I think he saw the Hippodrome, and he was concerned about horsemen coming in, so he made a barracks. But at the end of the day, he won't need it. He's going to have a Burgrave Palace in there, though, scouted by Demu immediately. Now, Burgrave Palace can work, and recently I've actually cast a lot of coRe games which feature the Burgrave Palace. And generally speaking, when you look at the Burgrave, it's all about getting a couple of men-at-arms out and having a deadly initial push. We actually touched on this in one of the previous games I cast. You need 1200 food per minute to consistently produce men-at-arms on the Burgrave Palace. You just don't have that in early game with the HRE. If you had something like a Fishing Eco or 2 town centers, it's a different story. But with a 1TC HRE build, you cannot continuously produce men-at-arms on the Burgrave Palace. You can get an initial surge of like 10, maybe even 15 men-at-arms, but mass production is a different story. Now, what Demu wants to do here, interestingly, is limit Hani. I did not expect that. Limitani will get absolutely butchered by men-at-arms, and I'm surprised about this build here for Demu. He must have seen the landmark. He had his scout, like, right here. So I'm not exactly sure what the plan is right now for him. It might be good to just harass enemy monks on relics. Maybe he's still expecting knights from his opponent. But Limitani just feels so useless against all these men-at-arms. The berries are also somewhat exposed here, so you have to keep in mind that these men-at-arms could cause a lot of chaos here. And the coRe should be very happy seeing Limitani from his opponent. Bears exposed, gold exposed, and Demu doesn't have a lot of troops that can deal with men-at-arms here. Tower with arrow slits is going to help a little, but still, men-at-arms can just harass these villagers and deny the resources here. Demu doesn't have a good backup gold mine. This is his secondary, and this is his tertiary. Frankly, the tertiary is actually safer than the secondary that spawned on the front. coRe just bringing in the relics right next to his DC here, trying to get them close. Here come the men-at-arms. Fortification also coming in on tower. This is going to be the strong point for Demu to hold. I think Demu just wants to take all the berries and then completely abandon this area. He's still far away from castle. So he's going to have to fight this out in feudal. And I'm not sure how he's going to do that. Now, Keshik can work fairly well if he goes for the Eastern Mercenary contract. But once men-at-arms get maces, Keshik will struggle against them as well. Bit of a skirmish here. Demu has to fall all the way back here. His tower is well fortified. Not something that his opponent can engage. But this is exactly why this is a deadly push. You can shut down the enemy's access to resources. And if you're coRe, you probably don't want to overcommit to this. You don't want to lose these men-at-arms because, again, replenishing them is a challenge. You actually see he only has 1 man-at-arms in queue. But what you want to do is establish presence over here and cut off your opponent from gold. And if you do that, you actually can prevent Demu from getting up to Castle Age. Of course, Demu is going to move to the north, but nice move from coRe to already position a couple of men-at-arms in that area. Also, this area doesn't have the buff of the cisterns, so this is already a less effective position for demu than this one is. Behind this, coRe also wants to pick up the relic. I don't know what happened here for the Veils. They were idle for a second. But yeah, coRe wants to pick up the relics behind this as well, because don't forget, he is playing from an eco-deficit position. Actually fighting against a lot of Limitani. Way too many Limitani. 1 man-at-arms is going to be insufficient against that. coRe is waiting for +2 defense, so he can actually absorb a little more arrow fire, but I don't think he should be torching this. Makes no sense trying to torch a tower with a 1000 HP. Especially when you consider that there is a cistern nearby as well. So you could just go Presidium, and then if you go Presidium, these towers are virtually indestructible. If you're coRe, you probably rush the Monastery, yes. Start picking up the relics. Love him targeting the Cistern. He could also try to just target the Aqueduct to disconnect the Cistern and lower the overall level. Let's have the Scout picked off. Sneaky Villager here with the tower could also be a cheeky move from coRe. But in general, he's doing a great job confining his opponent within his own base. That's exactly what you have to do in this scenario. Try and torch the Aqueducts. And this is why I just genuinely do not understand the Limitani build here. Limitani are absolutely crappy against men-at-arms. It's not like demu can make any units that deal with these troops in Feudal Age, but Limitani is definitely not going to be a solution. Like, it probably would have been better for demu to just not make any of these, make 2 more towers, and then hope he can make it to Castle Age. And now this is catastrophic for demu. He doesn't have a consistent food eco. He had to make some olive groves. He is actually idling both of his town centers. So the villager lead that's supposed to be there, it's not even going to be that much of a thing. He's only ahead by 7, which is essentially nothing when you consider that the opponent has the HRE buff. Nice little escape from demu to this little berry patch. coRe should definitely look for these villagers. He needs to know that his opponent has to be taking food from somewhere else. I still hate how he's committing against this tower. This should never be destroyed. He actually took out one of the towers, surprisingly. But this Cistern could still go for Presidium, something that demu did not do. But with Presidium, this tower fortified, it shouldn't be taken out. Some Javelins are coming out, by the way, from the Mercenary camp, but even Javelins are insufficient against this. They don't have armor-piercing capabilities. You see, 8 base damage. That's nothing against a unit that has 6 ranged armor. They just get cleaned up easily. coRe is doing exactly what he needs to do with this man-at-arms build. And I love how he's not overcommitting to this. In fact, I think he's a little overzealous trying to take out this tower. I think, frankly, confining his opponent into his base is actually sufficient on its own. Now, remember, Burgrave Palace build is a bit of an all-in style approach, so you don't want to drag this game out a lot. But when you have 4 or 5 relics, you might actually be able to afford just playing Palace of Schwabia Imperial. Bit of a mistake from coRe not touching on this area. He lost his scout. He actually lost both of his scouts, by the way. He went 2 scouts. He could have actually made a new scout and just looked for the villagers. He sees a couple of olive groves, so maybe he's thinking, okay, that's all the food that demu is grabbing. But he's actually very wrong. demu is taking food on the eastern flank. Still, it's 30 men-at-arms against no armor-piercing units. And we've seen this in one of the previous coRe Burgrave games, that when your opponent has armor-piercing units, like Musafari Warriors, let's say, or when your opponent has a competitive Castle Age timing and they can get some crossbows out, they can clean up a Burgrave build easily. But when the opponent doesn't have any armor-piercing capability in Feudal Age, this is a deadly build. And this is why I said that coRe should be very happy seeing a 2TC build from demu. Means that he can go to Castle Age easily and just flood him with Castle Age troops that the Byzantines have absolutely no counter to. I'm still shocked by the fact that Limitani is being used here. I guess the mindset here for demu is that he's got tower fire and he's got town center fire. He just needs something that absorbs the damage and is cheap. And Limitani do that fairly well. So, like, I think given the circumstances, demu is doing the only thing that could maybe work. It's just the fact that the circumstances are atrocious for him. This is a matchup that should never be won with the Byzantines once your opponent beats you to Castle Age like this. And now coRe's got 5 relics in there as well. Now finds the villagers on the hunt. That should be the end of the story for demu. just nowhere left to go really for him. His lumberjacks are getting butchered, farmers idled for forever essentially. Villagers now having to flee as well. coRe has gotten 17 villager kills, so he now even has the villager lead. But even if he didn't kill a single villager, just causing this much idle time in itself is sufficient. demu just having to flee all the way back. In retrospective, I think the issue for demu was that he got beaten to Castle Age very badly. I don't know what he could have done differently. I'm actually surprised about the Hippodrome choice, though. If he had the Vinery landmark, though, he could have gotten a little bit more out of those berries, maybe. Tough to say, really tough to say. I feel like just 2TC build against the HRE when you don't have anything that deals with Man-at-Arms in Feudal Age is just a dangerous thing to do. And demu will just step out of this one. Again, I feel like this is not a thing where we can just say, hey, demu messed this up or something. It's more of a fact that, okay, he was put into a position where he simply had no response to what coRe was able to do. Maybe if he tries to play Fast Castle himself, open with Cataphracts could have been an interesting game. He tried to play 2TCs, and coRe essentially did the counter to a 2TC build. By definition, when you play 2TCs, you will delay your Castle Age timing. That means that you probably will be missing out on the relics. And it also means that against a civilization that can flood Men-at-Arms, you don't really have a good answer, and you could just get overwhelmed by these Men-at-Arms, exactly what we've seen from coRe. Hopefully, you've enjoyed this game. If you did, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Those metrics help me greatly. Also, look around the rest of the channel because you might find some additional costs that might be interesting to you. Hopefully, we will see each other in a future video as well. Thank you so much for watching, and I'm going to see you in the next cast.